Hi, this is Pod Save the UK. I'm Nish Kumar.
And I'm Coco Khan. Today, the UK is bracing itself as Trump unveils his trade tariffs. And in the face of economic chaos, we're chatting to food security expert Tim Lang about how we can shore up Britain's precarious supply chains.
Then, with Just Stop Oil putting down the tin soup and saying goodbye to direct action, we're talking about the future of the right to protest.
First, though, do you want to hear a big news, Nish?
What is the big news, Coco?
This is our 100th episode. It's our centenary, the PSUK centenary. That was God Save the Queen. I don't know why that came out.
Yeah, why is that?
I don't know. I don't know any other horn music. Do you know any other horn music?
I'm trying to do what has become my sort of speciality in the last couple of years, which has become a kind of interpreter for Coco Khan's outpourings, given that her mouth is directly connected to her brain with no filtration system whatsoever. I think, so for people outside the UK, if you live to 100, the reigning monarch sends you a letter.
Yes.
And so I think in what Coco's mind has jumped through that.
Yes. Yes, that's exactly what. And do you know what was really great? Is I didn't even know that's what had happened. But you did.
To celebrate the 100th episode, I am actually coming to you from the mothership, from deep inside the hub of Crooked's actual office in LA. And it's a real relief for everybody, especially if you're watching this on YouTube, because the last few weeks, it has been like getting a FaceTime call from your uncle who doesn't fully know how to use his new mobile phone.
It's like, you know, when you see the Attenborough or like a sort of BBC Spring Watch and they got the camera traps and then the little badger comes out like snout first. It's a little bit like that, like Night Watch. Nish. Yeah. Actually, that's not fair. You look great anyway.
From next week, we will be back to webcam in the face as I continue my world tour through to Australia and New Zealand. My body does not know what time it is anywhere. I think bits of my body have now got stuck in different time zones. Right, so the news juggernaut heading towards us as we record is US tariffs. Now, it's not clear what impact they'll have, but I think we can safely predict not good. It's an economic kick in the nuts. In the same week, millions of people in the UK will see their bills go up.
That's right. This month is being dubbed Awful April. I can't believe it. We've got a new name for it, as households are hit by a wave of increases to their bills. So energy, water, council tax, all going up, as are mobile and broadband bills, as well as TV licenses and car taxes.
This painful jump in household bills comes less than a week after Rachel Reeves announced welfare cuts. But for a Labour government still reeling from accusations that their policies are more Tory than the Tories, it's a further twist to the knife for Britain's poorest families.
For sure, for sure. And, you know, even just the fact it's being called Bill Hike Day, you know, you don't land on a day in the first year. Do you know what I mean? Like, this is something that has now become part of our lived experience year in and year out after a cost of living crisis has been going on for, how many years now? It feels like at least 5, something even more. There is some good news here, though. For workers aged over 21, minimum wage has gone up. The state pension is also going up at the end of the week. But is this really enough to counteract these tax and bill hikes, especially alongside the havoc wrought by Trump's tariffs?
They're calling it Liberation Day here. It's hard to say what is being liberated from what, apart from economic policy being liberated from the shackles of basic common sense.
What is the feeling there, just out of curiosity, on Liberation Day? Is it that you turn on the television and people are saying, it's Liberation Day?
I would say the mood here, based on my interactions with Americans, is one of deep and profound shame. It's like if somebody comes around to a family dinner and your family is absolutely acting up. That might be something very specific to do with me and my family.
No. I can relate. It's the sort of opening the door and just saying, I'm so sorry before they come in. It's been Liberation Day is all across the press here, all across the world, I would imagine. There's been a real scramble from leaders to try and get exceptions, right? We don't know at the time of recording whether there will be one rule for everyone or whether there will be on individual nations basis, there will be exceptions. Obviously, the UK wants something favourable. We want a special exemption. So Keir Starmer has pulled out all the stops. He's even included an offer for Trump to visit Britain in June to sign an agreement, which was actually turned down.
There is logic to these exemptions being sought after by the Labour government, because forecasters have said that a 20% tariff increase, which is one of the figures that's being bandied around, it would cut the size of the British economy by 1% and force the Chancellor Rachel Reeves into tax rises this autumn. So I guess on the one hand, you look at it and you say, well, when the numbers are of that size, and given also what we've just been talking about in terms of bill-mageddon day, however you want to brand this fucking nightmare, whatever way round you go, it's a terrible thing for the British economy. So now the question becomes, what should Britain be willing to do in order to compromise with Trump?
Sometimes it can sound like the UK doesn't really have any options. I mean, lots of leading economies, including the EU, are expected to retaliate. We're not making that threat. What do you think, Nish? Do you think this pragmatic middle way is going to save us from this, as you put it, bill-mageddon? Bill-mageddon sounds like a person.
Yeah.
He's like an actor that I watch on Amazon Prime.
Bill-mageddon sounds like he did some time in the Royal Shakespeare Company in the 80s before playing a James Bond villain.
We like a man with a character arc. We do, bill-mageddon.
I think that one of the key things we've learned in the near full decade of the kind of Trump epoch is that constantly trusting Donald Trump to behave in a steady and consistent manner is an absolute fool's errand. And so the idea that Starmer can sufficiently placate a man as volatile and as thin-skinned as Donald Trump is actually incredibly naive. And whatever the government is saying to us publicly and whatever it feels obliged that it has to continue saying, I absolutely hope to high heaven that behind closed doors, they are having much more practical conversations. The most practical thing Starmer can be doing and the Labour government can be doing at this point is to plan for total volatility. That is just a simple reality. And I'm only basing that on all of the things that Trump has said and done.
It is hard to imagine the UK doing anything else, though, isn't it? Like, I know we've been talking about getting closer to Europe, especially over our kind of shared defence aims and the situation in Ukraine. But come on, Labour's not going to try and get back in the EU. Like, it's just not going to happen. That's gone. That's dead in the water. So we're out here on our own. I mean, an argument might even be perhaps even if rejoining the EU was on the table, maybe that's not something we should be doing. It's not like the EU isn't without its problems at the moment, particularly if these tariffs come on. And also, like there's a lot of stuff going on across Europe with the far right as well, over across in France. I was listening to Pod Save the World. Please do listen to our sister podcast. And Ben was reflecting how, like, you hear this news about Le Pen not being able to run in the French elections, and you might understandably say, yay, because, of course, the far right are really scary. But also, we need to remember that the left have been pushed out in France as well, and they're being alienated. And so there is a problem of this kind of centrist mush in France and in other countries as well. As progressives, maybe we shouldn't be looking to them anyway. Maybe those are old solutions from an old time, and now as a new world order, and perhaps this is the right way.
Nobody wants to relitigate Brexit, even for someone like me who was very much in favour of us remaining in the European Union. It's very hard for me to make a democratic case for us revisiting that decision. However, there are elements of the deal that I think it would be practical from a trading perspective to re-examine, because the British people are suffering, okay, and these kind of tariffs are going to hit a population that I don't know how many more hits it can actually take financially. And so if Starmer is a ruthless pragmatist, as he continually maintains, then one of the things he's going to have to do is re-examine our customs union relationship with the European Union. And that even if we don't have a conversation about rejoining the EU, which, again, none of us wants to have, there are elements of the Brexit deal that I think it would be worth re-examining, specifically in terms of a customs union.
So one of the side effects of constantly reacting to what the US is going to do next is that it skews our own news. Issues that really matter don't get the same attention that they would have done before Trump 2.0. That's partly down to all of us, isn't it? So we've got to turn away from the sound and the fury and look at what's happening under our own noses.
Yes, so the big domestic news in the UK has involved our right to protest and the future of direct action in the UK. There's a couple of things to flag up here. The environmental activist group Just Stop Oil announced last week that it's stopping disruptive protests for now. And police raided a Quaker meeting house and arrested 6 activists from Youth Demand, a group protesting arms sales to Israel and climate change, who were organising there.
One of our listeners emailed us about the raid. They said, I assumed this undemocratic bullshit was America, but it appears upon 3 readings to be the UK. This feels like a perfect what the fuck. The fuck indeed. Let's hear what Ella from Youth Demand had to say.
You know, we're 6 young women sat in a circle talking about the state of the country and our responsibility at this time, and dozens of officers fully suited up, some with tasers, swarm in. Within about 2 seconds, we are all under arrest. And it's an incredibly violating thing, you know. While we were in the cells, they went and raided our homes.
Let me just read to you what the Metropolitan Police have said. They said, whilst we absolutely recognise the importance of the right to protest, we have a responsibility to intervene to prevent activity that crosses the line from protest into serious disruption and other criminal activity. So they're saying that you were plotting public nuisance, basically.
What we are doing in Youth Demand, what the police could have come to the publicly advertised talk and heard the plan of, is engaging in a proud British tradition of civil disobedience, right? And these actions are necessary and proportionate to the times we live in.
Thank God, Coco, the police are going after the Quakers, the real troublemakers in society. Could they not take a truncheon to the head of some kindergarten students? I can't fucking believe this. I really, really can't believe that they've gone in with tasers to a bunch of kids meeting in a Quaker meeting house.
I know. Did you see the quote from one of the Quakers that was in the house at the time? They said, the only resistance I could put up was to make tea and drink it in front of them without offering them it, which I thought was like a beautiful bit of light in this quite dark story.
That's the Quaker equivalent of giving somebody the finger, but also it's draconian and it's Orwellian. You know, there is an element of the Minority Report about this, this sort of pre-crime division. Like they got a tip-off from Samantha Morton in a big bath of milk that these protesters were about to do some future crimes and burst into the Quaker meet. I can't get over this and really feel like it's worth restating as many times as possible. The Quaker meeting house with tasers.
This has been a total fumble. Even the Spectator were talking about it now.
Even the Spectator.
Even the Spectator.
What are we now going to deem the Spectator to be? A rabble of leftist Marxist agitators? Again, for listeners outside the UK, the Spectator is the most squarely conservative publication, I think, in the entire UK press. And even they have been heavily critical of the police's actions here.
And it's worth saying as well, these arrests came days after Just Stop Oil has said that they're ending direct action. They've said it's because they've been successful in their aims, and they have been. You know, the government has ended new oil and gas licenses, but that's not the whole story.
Yeah, successive laws introduced under the Conservatives have been making it more difficult to carry out disruptive protests like these. In particular, peaceful tactics, and we should continually restate, none of these protests are planning or executing violent protests. There is, you know, the property damage is minimal and tends to be easily washed off, whether it's paint or fucking baked beans. The peaceful tactics like locking on tunnelling or causing, and this is the sort of language in which the laws are all being framed, serious annoyance have been criminalised. This has resulted in Just Stop Oil activists facing much longer jail terms. Last summer, 5 Just Stop Oil supporters were given multi-year sentences for planning roadblock protests. These were the longest ever handed down for non-violent civil disobedience.
Arrestable protests are really scary for most people. They are. And, you know, they're designed to be. They're designed to put people off. So, you know, when people go ahead and do these things, they are acting in their conviction and they act in great risk. But things are getting even worse for them. So the Crime and Policing Bill is currently making its way through Parliament. It's the 4th anti-protest bill in 4 years. Organisations like Amnesty are warning of further erosion of our rights to peaceful protests. The bill will ban face coverings and pyrotechnics at protests. It will criminalise climbing war memorials. The police will also be given powers to force protesters in the UK on limited visas to leave the country if they get a caution.
Now, we covered the crackdown on protest rights on Pod Save the UK's second ever episode, a long 98 episodes ago, way back in May 2023. Paul Powsland, a barrister who represents environmental protesters, warned us specifically that changes in legislation were leading to a situation where police can arrest people on increasingly thin grounds. Here is a quick throwback to that conversation.
when a new law is passed, there's different circles, if you like. The first circle is the kind of conduct which, if it goes forward to a court, the court will convict and say that is a breach of the law and a criminal offence, right? But beyond that circle is a whole extra circle of conduct which can be brought in by the police's reasonable suspicion to arrest you for the thing, right? So there's loads of conduct which wouldn't actually be found to be a criminal offence if it goes to court, but which is enough to give you reasonable suspicion to arrest. And every time you expand the circle of things that are actually criminal offences, you also expand the circle of things that the police can reasonably arrest for.
We can't say, and when I say we, I don't even mean wider society. I mean, literally the hosts and listenership of this podcast can't say that we weren't warned about this from the very beginning. So it is something that we should be incredibly concerned by.
And I think it's worth mentioning that Labour had committed to scrutiny of these laws when they were in opposition, but now it seems like they're on board, taking it further. You know, it's where does it end? It is genuinely quite scary.
I think one of the biggest problems we've had politically in the way that we've talked about these issues there has been this kind of weaponization of a moral panic around freedom of speech by the political right. And progressives, a lot of us have bought into this argument and engaged with it, even though it is happening in bad faith. And now we're actually seeing genuine, real threats to people's free speech. In the UK, we're seeing police raiding Quaker meeting houses. I don't know why, but that is really stuck out in my head. It's like, you're going after the Quaker. Are you all deranged? Anyway, we're seeing actual restrictions on freedom of speech. And this isn't something that's come out of nowhere. We're seeing the consequences of changes in the legislation made within the last 2 years and how they impact on people's day-to-day lives and democratic right to engage in peaceful protest. It is a really, really chilling thing that we're seeing actual threats to freedom of speech by governments around the world. Just this week, Marco Rubio's department said it was concerned about freedom of expression in the UK because of a case involving an anti-abortion campaigner accused of breaching an abortion clinic buffer zone. It's even been reported that this has been a factor in trade talks, which has been denied by the UK's business secretary. We've allowed in the last decade the conversation around free speech to become so corrupted that you have, on the one hand, Conservative governments bringing in legislation that clamps down on freedom of speech. And the other hand, you've got a bunch of people going on Twitter and saying, I'm not sure that you should be saying that in public. And we've allowed those two to be treated exactly the same. Actually, it's not even exactly the same. We've allowed a moral panic to develop about a group of people that are, and I count myself as one of them, inconsequential and annoying. But that's not the same as governments restricting people's freedom of speech and rounding up students for protesting. And I feel culturally we've all been taken for fools here. And it is a source of deep and profound frustration, as you can tell from the escalating anger that is building in my voice. I am totally fucking sick of it.
After the break, we hear from food security expert Tim Lang about Britain's precarious food supply and whether, as Trump wreaks economic havoc, stockpiling is really the solution.
PodSave the UK is brought to you by Voy.
Some of you might be considering using weight loss products. That's, of course, completely up to you and totally your choice. But if you are looking around for products like these, then you might want to know about Voy.
Voy is a new weight loss program that combines medication and one-to-one lifestyle coaching and helps you to achieve weight loss healthily, happily, and in a way that sticks.
Because unlike what we've all been told forever, that weight loss is about willpower and we just need to try harder, Voy knows that that's not quite right. It's actually about finding the right approach for you, for your body, for your routine. It's why they call themselves the last weight loss program you'll ever need.
Through coaches and doctors, you'll get the support you need to stay on track. With one-to-one coaching in the Voy app, Voy has already helped over 70,000 people lose weight and keep it off.
Get started now and get an exclusive discount on the Voy program when you go to joinvoy.com/PSUK. So that's JOIN Voy, VOY.com/PSUK.
Treatments will only be prescribed if deemed appropriate by a qualified healthcare professional following a consultation.
Joinvoy.com/PSUK to get started. Now, another subject of growing importance in the UK, which doesn't always get the attention it should, is food policy. In recent months, we've seen farmers protesting over inheritance tax and cuts to agricultural subsidies. Trump's tariffs, global instability, and extreme weather all risk affecting our agricultural sector and raise the question, how resilient are the UK's supply chains to sudden shocks?
What makes us particularly vulnerable is that the United Kingdom is not self-sufficient in food production. Around 40% of our food is imported, and that figure is rising.
In an effort to increase food resilience, last year the government advised all households to have 3 days worth of tinned food and water. Not sure if you got that message, Nish, because I definitely did not. But is stockpiling really the answer?
I definitely did not get that message, and hearing you say that has filled my body with chills.
It makes you nervous. You'd be like, oh, what? The government advised us to stockpile, and nobody got the message. Doesn't fill you with confidence, does it?
A major new report from the National Preparedness Commission has warned urgent action is needed to develop the UK's food resilience. Coco and our sometimes co-host of PS UK and good friend journalist Zoe Grunewald caught up with the author of the report, Tim Lang. Tim is a professor of food policy at City St George's University of London.
So I take it you are a stockpiler?
Well, it depends what you mean by stockpiling.
3 days of butter beans?
Let me just be very pompous right at the outset.
Okay.
Because a stockpile, well, Switzerland has 3 months of stockpile for the country and is talking about raising that to a year's supply. That's a stockpile. If I keep or you keep 4 tins of beans, is that a stockpile? When I was young, which is a long time ago, that was just called having a good larder. But do I keep some? My wife and I do. Yes, we do. Am I conscious of that? Yes. But do I think individual stockpiling is the answer to the fragility of the food system or the capacity of it to break down or get tumbled by shocks? No. I think it's community stupid. That's actually what gives you security, not if I or you have 10 tins of beans under our bed.
So when you talk about food security, though, what actually does that mean, food security?
Good point. The UN system defined food security as when you've got affordability being met, accessibility, availability, and desirability. Mm-hmm. But then it got sort of over time with experience looking in the developing world, let alone the rich world, stability, security, and confidence, and it starts getting multifactorial. You need to tick lots of boxes for a population to feel food secure, or even a group or a family or a household to feel food secure. And what I did in this report for the National Preparedness Commission was to say, how prepared is the British public? Mm-hmm. Not Sudan, not Gaza, the British public, the 6th richest economy on the planet. How prepared is it for the possibility of shocks? And what sort of shocks could hit the British food system? And are we prepared for those? And what would it take to get the British public more engaged with its collective security? Well, it took me 2.5 years, and I think I've barely scratched the surface, to be honest, because what sort of shocks? It can go from climate change, which is creeping into us already, one moment drought, one moment disruptions. It could be another pandemic, which the government's risk assessment think is the most likely shock coming our way. It could be ransomware taking out the big food companies. Imagine if Tesco, which sells 1/3 of all take-home to cook at home food, 1/3. Imagine if its systems were knocked out by some sort of ransomware. But the core fact that I came up with was almost all of the experts I spoke to, some inside track in government, big head honchos in the food companies, little people, small people, civil society, everyone agreed from different starting points the food system is much more fragile than we like to think. Why? Because the last 60 years it's been based into and developed around the concept of just-in-time delivery systems. There is no storage. It's all on the motorway. 1/5 of all lorries on British motorways are food. The supermarkets don't have storage. You don't have storage. So if something gets knocked, it's dead easy for moral panics and disturbances and disruptions to begin to get people worried, and then suddenly it can get a lot worse. And we've seen in the last 2 years how food can be weaponized? It's a horrible word for a horrible reality. Why should Britain think it's on its own and doesn't need to think about these things?
You spoke about pandemics as a big risk factor. And obviously we had one fairly recently. What did we learn from that? Did we come close to food insecurity then? I mean, how did that impact us?
No one starved. No one died of kwashiorkor in COVID. Some emergency systems, a parcel system worked, but it didn't work well. I sit on the Mayor of London's food board, and we noted that parcels of food that bore little resemblance to what one should get were delivered. And it was all very ad hoc and went to the wrong people, and people who needed help didn't get it. The systems of support weren't there. The infrastructure wasn't there. There were lots of lessons from that. And yet the Hallett inquiry into COVID isn't even looking at food.
But wait, hang on. So am I right in thinking that you're saying there that, like, in terms of food insecurity, COVID had an impact, but not so much for us to provoke any soul searching? But I was under the impression that food insecurity in the UK is quite rife, that because of poverty, that many, many households experience it. In fact, my little stat here says 14%, that's 7.3 million adults experience food insecurity. Is there a disconnect then from a person's experience of food insecurity and what is defined by policymakers?
It was actually the Deputy Prime Minister of the previous government who announced on the morning of the election, he announced to a defence industries conference, not the public, a defence industries conference, said, "Dear British, will you please store 3 days of food?" I mean, that sent me apoplectic. I will freely admit it. I couldn't believe the stupidity of saying something like that. And some people have said, why was that so stupid? Because it was taking no account of differences in people's circumstances. You've said the 14% who can't even afford to feed their children and themselves well. We're not talking about the demographics. What's a good diet? What should people do? If you go to that government website, it just said store food and store water. How much? For how long? The harsh politics is the closer to the former Soviet Union you get, the more people take this seriously. I interviewed people in the Latvian Baltic states and Sweden, and they just say, we're next. If Ukraine falls, we're next. The government is taking that food security and engaging with their public much more seriously. And we should do better. We could do better, and other countries are doing better.
I feel a bit bad now because when I got married, my mum was like, I'm going to get you a chest freezer. And I was like, Mum, I live in a flat. Like, I don't have space for a chest freezer. She just looked at me with these eyes being like, you don't understand that you need a chest freezer.
Well, you're both right. Your mum was right to be thinking about your storage and security, but you're right, because what's the first thing, most likely thing to go out in a crisis facing Britain? What is it? Tell me.
The chest freezer?
Electricity.
Oh, right.
The biggest exercise the British government did behind closed doors was a year and a half ago, did a 3-day exercise of what would happen if the electricity system went down. Bang goes your storage.
Right,
Coco.
okay.
Bang goes. So just tell your mother, I laughed and I was rude to you, but you were right, Mum.
Because obviously when we talk about food, we talk about farming, agriculture, inevitably the conversation often comes back to Brexit. Are we more food insecure now we've left the EU? I mean, how did that relationship and that severing of that relationship impact our food?
We're definitely more food dependent than we were, because if you erect barriers between where you get 30% of your food, you've just made your life more difficult. And we have. Small companies are having great difficulty exporting and importing. Companies in the European Union, that even Dutch, Netherlands, where we get a lot of our fresh vegetables from on those huge greenhouses, they're saying, why bother? Why should we send it to the Brits? It's more than it's worth. But what we've got, the frustration of politics at the moment, the farmers actually, I think, are not seizing their opportunity here. They're fighting over land and inheritance taxes. Actually, what they should be talking about is, can we be producing more food? How could a Labour government start growing more food here? What would that mean? And in my report, I go into that. I said, actually, if there's one thing the government should be doing, is it's rapidly increasing horticulture, because that's what the Brits don't eat enough of. And that's what we have the biggest import bill on. And that's the thing that's most vulnerable. We should be diversifying what we do in order to have a diversified diet.
Maybe this is a bit too philosophical, but the idea of like
food as the foundation of economic growth, food as the foundation of education. We've sort of disconnected food from lots of other political conversations we're having. I mean, this was some years ago now. I wrote a piece about could Britain be self-sufficient, mainly because I got into gardening. I'm not any good, but I had a little moment where I thought, maybe I could be this person. I could do some spuds or whatever.
Is this your mother again?
Yeah, maybe, actually. Maybe.
Did she give you a fork and spade?
Oh, I wish. Anyway, we won't get into my mum's chili plant adventures. So I spoke to a food expert who said that Britain, just the size of our population and the size of our island, we could never be fully self-sufficient. And so therefore, our resilience is based on our trading relationships. And of course, Brexit damaged those. And now there's obviously environmental problems across the world and war, X, Y, Z. And it made me think afterwards, I was reflecting on it, that it made it feel that food is the role of the market. It is a business arena. But actually hearing you speak now, that's a new idea, that's a new ideology, and it's one that's not necessarily serving us. And when you look at places where you do see where policymakers and governments are directly involved with food, for example, serving food in schools, in hospitals, in prisons, Marcus Rashford's campaign about free school meals, yes, it makes so much sense. So why not extend it out to everything, every person? Do you think that's too much, or is that like commie pinko madness?
No, I don't. You're absolutely right. We've tended to buy the Thatcherite language of markets can sort everything out. Actually, markets have to be framed. You've got to frame markets. The whole language of neoliberal thinking is based around agriculture, of course. Markets, freedom, trade, investment, growth. But the point is, what sort of growth? Where do you want to grow? What do you want to grow? One of the things I did was look at the official government resilience policy. There is one, actually. You probably didn't know that, but there is. It's actually pretty good. It says principles should be based on prevention is better than the cure, take a whole of society approach, get everyone onto the same page if you want them to do something. And I thought, great, this is fantastic. What do they say about food? Nothing. Actually, one risk out of 89 that face the country as an official risk list. Only one is food related. I like to think of all these people working up this risk assessment, then going off and having nice meals and just think, we did a good job there doing it. Just not even thinking about food as a source of risk or as something that could be intrinsically risky.
So let's think about some of those solutions then. You were saying, your report's quite optimistic about things that can be done. What are they? What are some low-hanging fruits?
Well, I was interested in the public. There are lots of things that people can do. We have a history of people digging for victory. I have a whole page, indeed a whole chapter, looking at what citizens can do. And it ranges from growing more food, audits of our community to say, here we are in West London. What assets have they got? They've got lots of eateries. They've got lots of big kitchens. So if your kitchen is taken out, Coco or Zoe, there may be others who can cook at a mass scale. That's a community food asset that's really important and potentially good for resilience. What did we do in COVID? Closed it all down. Just when those sort of facilities should have been used. And I looked at examples of where people are doing community gardening, 200 households sharing some land. Even in cities, there's a lot of land where food could be grown, and it's where people are. So I turned round what could be quite scary report into a very optimistic report, saying, look, there are things we can do. And why am I confident in that? Because when I looked at other countries, that's what they say too. They don't say just store food, even if you haven't got any storage or can't afford it. They say do something, know your neighbors. As one military person said to me, it's a fantasy, this American prepper nonsense, where you get a gun and Coco has a store and puts locks on the doors and said it's mine. And then she's completely lost if it's gone. Actually, strength is in communities.
I mean, it's funny you talk about solidarity because it feels like the conversation about food security recently has become kind of wrapped in division. And I'm particularly talking about the debate around farmers and farming and what Labour is doing for farmers. Labour obviously recently caused outrage by introducing the agricultural inheritance tax for the first time. They scrapped sustainable farming payments. TV farmer Jeremy Clarkson has declared it is without a doubt the end for British farming. Do you agree with that? I mean, how devastating is this for Labour, and how devastating is this for farmers?
I'll choose my words very carefully. I think the Treasury played a fairly, I'll be hard, dirty trick on DEFRA by announcing that and basically pushing it through. I can understand lots of people in the Labour government would say, well, it's time we started taxing. Why shouldn't farmers pay taxes? Indeed, the public partly thinks that. But how it was done was cack-handed politically and set a hostility among farmers that was politically stupid. But farmers, having said that, really do need to start thinking much more. What are they for? They say all the time they're about producing food and feeding people. They actually feed markets. That's a very different thing.
Why don't we curb the supermarkets? Because the farmers had real grievances.
They do.
It really stuck in my head. I heard one chap talking about the flour in a loaf of bread. A loaf of bread, obviously, the price of that has gone up.
Nothing.
They get absolutely nothing. And that's a whole year of their lives that they are working on tending to these.
But Coco, that raises such enormous points about the political economy. If you want a short supply chain where the primary producer gets a good whack of what you and I spend as consumers, well, you've got to redesign the food system. You've got to reframe the market, literally reframe it. That's big politics. And actually, that's what happens in wars. It does get done very quickly.
So Labour has tried to extend an olive branch with the farmers. It's talking about public sector food targets. What is that?
Why?
Well, first of all, what is that? What is public sector food targets? I don't even understand.
I'm really sorry to interrupt you, but you can tell my frustration. If I get another government that comes in and says, oh, well, let's just deal with the public sector. The public sector is trivially small compared to Tesco. There are 9 supermarkets, dear interviewers, who sell 94.5% of all food you take home to cook. 4 of those sell 3/4 of it. This is huge compared to the public sector. To just say, oh, well, the government, we can only deal with the public sector is nonsense. You can reframe the lot. You can say, we actually want farmers. Why do I say that? Because France did that. It said it wanted to have a certain percentage in every store to be from local suppliers. It set a target. Come on. You can do it if you want to. It's food everywhere is what needs to be addressed if you want a food secure economy. If you want a food resilience culture, you've got to engage the public in that. They've got to be engaged in skilling themselves and improving their capacity to deal with crises.
And what do you think the role for legislation is here?
I think it's central. Even Sweden, which is in the EU, said we need to have a new piece of legislation. Out of £55.5 billion you spend on armaments in 2023, guess, Coco and Zoe, omniscient journalists that you all are, how much money was given to civil defence?
I'm going to go with 0.
You're a cynic.
Okay.
You're a cynic, but you're close. It was only 65 million.
Oh, wow.
It's not even a pound a head.
Right.
Okay, that's pretty sobering.
And are you hopeful that the government is going to take this on?
This is when I take a deep breath.
But the farmers liked your report, didn't they?
A lot of people liked the report.
The Farmers Union, I believe.
We liked the report.
A lot of people have liked the report, to my pleasure. There are a lot of people, the industries are actually picking up saying, we're going to make this our discussion point in our annual conferences and things like that, which I think is terrific. The government, in 3 different parts of it, are talking about it. That actually is pretty good for in policy world to get it sort of taken up. But nothing will happen unless the public demands it. You can write the best report in the world and it'll sink without trace. It's events that make it. And what we've got to do is see the public press, their MPs, their councillors, to say, look, what are you doing about this?
At the beginning of this interview, before we started recording, you told me you don't watch TV.
No, we didn't have a TV.
You didn't have a TV?
We didn't have a TV for 45 years, yeah.
Well, I assume then you never watched the show The Walking Dead. But if you did
I've never heard of it, let alone watched it.
It's basically, all you need to know is it's a zombie apocalypse. And
I'd find that too scary.
well, yeah, no, it is scary. It is scary. But the lesson in this, they go through all these, little communities trying to survive in this zombie apocalypse, and all the communities that thrive work together, and all the communities that get drawn into infighting die a horrible death. So,
there you go.
we don't need a report in some ways. Great job on the report. But I just mean it's everywhere, isn't it? It's common sense. It's in our literature. It's everywhere,
Well, it's obviously a communist TV program, because most TV would have said it's, the individual hero, Arnold Schwarzenegger type macho man who would sort things out.
Right.
So you're talking about the politics there again, which is communities or individuals. And we're in that in civil food resilience. That's what it's all about.
Tim Lang, thank you so much for joining us on Pod Save the UK.
Thank you. Very nice.
Thank you.
Well, that was a great chat, and thanks once again to the great Zoe Grunewald. Coco, I want to ask you a question. Do you feel more or less scared after having that conversation with Tim?
I feel neutral about it. I thought he's such an expert, and that gave me an enormous amount of confidence that there are good people working on this, and there are solutions out there, and things are being tried out, and we're in a good position to try to make some of those solutions work. However, I did feel a little bit, I suppose, despondent about how it had come to be this problem. I didn't know much about the just-in-time delivery approach that we have to food. You just assume that supplying food is something that the government has under control. And then actually what Tim did is he peeled away that, in fact, really it's private companies that we are placing our food security onto. And that scares me. That unnerves me already, right? Because obviously they have a profit motive. More than anything, though, it was just fascinating chat, and I feel better about my stockpiling habits, even if none of them have any nutritional value. I'm quite good at it, Nish.
Coco Khan has been stockpiling crisps since 2007.
Exactly. I'm single-handedly keeping space raiders afloat. Now, with Pope Francis in and out of hospital, Vatican insiders are already scheming over his successor. But decades before Francis worked to rebuild trust in the church, a scandal rocked the Vatican: the mysterious death of banker Roberto Calvi.
Found hanging under a London bridge in 1982, Calvi's death was ruled a suicide, but plenty of people weren't convinced. 40 years later, journalist Niccolo Minoni got a tip that there was more to the story.
In Crooked's newest series, Shadow Kingdom, God's Banker, Niccolo unspools the thread of this immersive true story to answer one question: who killed God's banker?
Listen to Shadow Kingdom, God's Banker, wherever you get your podcasts, or binge all episodes now at crooked.com/friends or on the Shadow Kingdom Apple Podcasts feed.
Now, after the break, Labour wants to up their TikTok game and turn their backbenchers into influencers. So in other news this week, it looks like Labour is about to have a social media glow-up.
A group of Labour MPs known as the Labour Growth Group wants to increase the party's presence on social media as a way of reaching wider audiences and speaking back to critics. They want to get Labour voices onto the platforms of popular figures and are keen for their backbenchers to become influencers in their own right.
The party has also just appointed a new communications chief, former TikTok employee James Lyons, who has advised ministers to appear on more podcasts and in lifestyle magazines.
With fewer people watching TV and reading the papers, it seems Labour is starting to view social media as more of a key arena for political discussion. Finally, in 2025, Labour has cottoned on to social media being important. I can't wait for their next campaign to be entirely fidget spinner based.
But is it good news? That's the question. Is it good news for politics? Is it good news for podcasts? Is it good news for us, Nish?
I don't know how good news it is for us specifically. But I mean, listen, broadly, in principle, the idea of communicating about politics and policy is something I am incredibly in favour of. And given that the majority of media consumption is now online based, it makes a lot of sense. My concern is what this is going to look like, right? Given the kind of stuff Labour has been posting on social media, it does suggest there is a sort of lack of nous, shall we say. Hopefully, the employing of this TikTok guy is actually going to help them understand the mediums a little bit better. I mean, last week they shared a post boasting about the number of people that have been deported during this government, which sort of they made look like this sort of beautiful graphic design generated like risograph print, which is fine sort of aesthetically, but it's more the message that's the problem there, right? You really are polishing a turd on that instance. You know, if you're bragging about the number of people you've deported, it doesn't matter what your font game is like. The target audience for that is still probably going to be put off by it. I mean, that's the thin end of the wedge. There was the horrendous video that featured AI-generated animals, including a bulldog in a police uniform, a hare dressed as a nurse, and a bull construction worker, telling us all the ways that Labour was going to improve Britain. Social media users quickly flagged that the song used in the video with Portuguese lyrics used sexually explicit and misogynist language, and Labour have since apologised for the post and taken it down. Let's just put it this way. It was not lyrics you would expect to be in a party political broadcast.
So the track was by DJ Hollander. It talks about smoking marijuana and having sex with a bitch. The lyrics urge a naughty young girl to sit on the singer's pot crazy dick, and finishes with the line, just a punch in the young girl's pussy.
Vote Labour.
Vote Labour? What? Oh, God.
It's just, my concern is not that Labour ministers are going to be using the internet and social media to communicate. My concern is, what will they be saying, and will they be doing it badly? I'm really worried that the next budget is going to feature Rachel Reeves doing an unboxing video with a briefcase. That's, which I think will not be a good look. Now, it is worth bringing up, and this sort of slightly brings us back to the conversation about the beautifully designed deportations poster. Labour MP John McDonnell has been critical of the push for Labour to be on social media. On X, he wrote, "No matter how many TikTok videos are done, there will never be enough to convince people that cutting benefits to disabled people is the right thing to do. It would be better to record a simple message that this attack on vulnerable people has been dropped." And that is a really important point here, okay? Because you can dress it up all you want. If what you're currently talking about is disabled people are going to be poorer, we've deported another load of people, and we sent the police to a Quaker rally, none of that is going to be helpful, regardless of how you dress it up on social media.
It does feel like we live in an age of political communication where like getting communication right is kind of all that matters, and the actual substance of it is being neglected. I don't think it's a given that everyone in Labour is terrible at communication. They've got some politicians who are pretty good online. Zara Sultana's a really good example. She's always having like really good conversations online. She's got a sense of humour. I very much enjoy following her.
We should probably flag the fact that Zara Sultana and John McDonnell, two of the MPs that we've mentioned, both still had the whip withdrawn. Their status as Labour MPs does come with a heavy question mark next to it at the moment. Specifically to talk further about podcasts, there's another angle to this conversation. So the former City trader turned economics commentator Gary Stevenson, who was a guest on this show, was among those who were approached by the Labour Growth Group. In a recent video on his YouTube channel, Gary's Economics, he laid out the pros and cons of engaging with the party. Let's take a look.
I think if I was thinking purely explicitly about like what is best for the YouTube channel, probably I wouldn't have them on. I think we've got a cool channel here. I think we make great videos. I think we make fun, exciting, accessible, educational, informative videos. People like it. We're growing really quickly. We're popular. Everybody hates Labour. I think they're going to do quite a bad job. Their brand is weak. It's kind of toxic. It's like purely from a growing the channel perspective, it seems like an unnecessary risk. But at the same time, I think, and I'm kind of a lone voice in this in our team, I think it's the right thing to do. We attack them, we criticise them. I think the right thing to do. These guys are literally, they're the government of this country. Even if we don't have other parties on, I think we have a kind of a duty to let them come on and defend themselves.
Nish, what do you think? Where do you stand on all this?
Well, look, this is sort of the problem of where we are with the kind of media landscape. The issue with podcasting is that podcasting it originally came about as a kind of alternative to radio. And so podcasting in its inception was, more about unedited, unstructured conversations. And those conversations would frequently be between friends. And there was an implicit understanding that you were effectively endorsing or at least showing some sympathy with the views of the person that you had on your show because you were platforming them. It was your hosting. You know, the podcast is your space. Now, we don't really think about that in terms of old media broadcasting organizations. I think the majority of people understand that CNN or the BBC are not endorsing the views of every single person that comes on there. And largely you can often tell that if by the tone of the questioning, you know, there is this kind of obligation that proper journalists have to push for accountability. And, you know, that's a somewhat idealized view of it. Loose principle, though, is that old media organizations were not endorsing people by having them on the show inherently, whereas podcasting, because it's seen as a cozier medium, there is an idea that it's always endorsing. Now, the problem is we're now in a media landscape where podcasting is just another facet of the wider media conversation rather than a specific and direct alternative to it. And I wonder if now it's time to start treating podcasts and podcasters with the same level of scrutiny that we treated the old media, and expecting them, if you have a guest on their show who has views that people might find abhorrent, do you have a kind of journalistic obligation to actually push back on this? Now, I've got to be honest with you, Gary Stevenson is exactly the sort of person I want to be interviewing Rachel Reeves about the Spring Statement. He worked in the city. He understands the mechanics of how it works. He is making thought out, rationalized arguments for things like wealth taxes and for things like tax increases for people earning the highest sums of money in the UK. For me personally, he's exactly the sort of person I want interviewing members of the Labour government. And I want him to do that with total freedom to ask whatever questions he wants to ask.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think that, you know, politics needs to go to the people, and that's where they are. And I think as well, it's worth understanding from the politicians' point of view, or I hope they do understand, that it's a two-way street. You know, they don't know all the concerns about every single demographic, and engaging with media that represents those voices, whether they are predominantly for progressives, or whether they predominantly speak for young people, or they predominantly speak for certain regions, or, you know, this is a fact-finding mission as well. It's a two-way street. It can be a really good relationship. So I think they're missing a trick by not doing that. But the point I wanted to make was that podcasting was meant to be for alternative views because there was a reality that the mainstream press wouldn't allow certain views. I mean, I speak for myself. I think, you know, I'm a progressive, I'm on the left. Even I have found myself going into traditional press and feeling like, okay, actually, I couldn't say a word here about like redistribution of wealth. You know, you have to say it really quickly under your breath and hope that no one catches you.
But I think it's really important now. We're no longer talking about a kind of cottage industry or a sort of, you know, we're talking about a multi-million pound industry, and we're talking about people who are getting paid hundreds of millions of dollars every year, who
for sure.
have no regulation applied to them.
But no, but like you were saying earlier when you were talking about free speech, that like you can say anything you want, but if it's putting people in danger, there's got to be consequences. Maybe it's not a total ban, but there's got to be some process in place, and at the minute there isn't.
Anyway, listen, this is clearly a subject that we could talk about for hours and hours and hours.
Well, I have got the mother of all subject changes because I'm going away for a bit. Oh, I've done it wrong. You haven't done
it wrong. We're in a slightly odd situation where you're trying to frame this that you're breaking news to me that I already know.
Yeah, I know.
This is actually more Coco addressing the listeners rather than a revelation to me of some information that I've been privy to.
Yeah, for some time. Basically, listeners, hello. I'm leaving you in the capable hands of Zoe Grunewald for some time because I'm taking some time off to have a baby. I just wish I got to that link quicker, you know? I felt it was there. I'm so glad I've been able to get this off my chest. You know how hard it is to hide a baby for 9 months? You know, I've been wearing extra loud shirts to distract from people seeing that I have a baby.
Shirts to say I'm not pregnant.
Yeah, exactly.
To be clear, you are going to come back because we're doing a mailbag special, and that'll be out in a couple of weeks. So you are going to be on there for that, but then you are going to be on maternity leave with your baby.
Yes, my son Genghis.
You're muddying the water between conversations you and I have had off mic and on mic.
Okay.
You've been referring jovially to your impending baby as Genghis.
Yes, because I want to protect his identity. And I think it would be really funny. I'm a Khan. So presumably if I say his name is Genghis, then if anyone decides to be nosy, then they'll just get a very interesting half an hour reading about the Mongol leader Genghis Khan. And I think that's fun for everyone, you know. Genghis Khan is also, a well-travelled man who was a self-starter. So, I hope that's the sort
Some
of
of the
character.
things he started himself off doing didn't turn out so great, especially for, say, the people that he murdered.
Yeah, I guess.
Self-starter is not inherently a positive thing. Genghis Khan had a side hustle. It's just the side hustle was murdering a load of people.
I am really conscious that I'm probably now going to get a tweet being like, I can't believe you're making light of this murderer. But I do think
Too
that
soon to make light of Genghis Khan?
I
Too
feel
soon?
like 1,500 years. How many years was it? Is it 1,500? When was Genghis Khan? It's got to be at least 1,000 years, right? Anyway, whatever. It can't be too soon, surely.
Anyway, on behalf of the listeners and myself, Coco, congratulations. And we look forward to your return with Tales of New Motherhood.
I'm looking forward to being able to moralise with you and start every sentence with, as a mother,
Yes.
to silence you. I'm genuinely really looking forward to doing that. It's the best bit. And that's it. Thank you for listening to Pod Save the UK.
Don't forget to follow us on @PodSaveTheUK on Instagram, TikTok and Twitter. We're now also on Blue Sky. You can follow us there @PodSaveTheUK.crooked.com. And if you want more of us, make sure that you're subscribed to our YouTube channel.
Pod Save the UK is a reduced listening production for Crooked Media.
Thanks to producer May Robson, assistant producer and editor Nardis Miljanic, and researcher Isabella Anderson.
Our theme music is by Vasilis Fotopoulos.
The executive producers are Louise Cotton, Madeline Herringer and Katie Long, with additional support from Ari Schwartz.
And remember to hit subscribe for new shows on Thursdays on Amazon, Spotify or Apple or wherever you get your podcasts.